Good morning, everybody. Bore da. We're delighted to be here at BERA to talk about our partnership at the University of South Wales, our initial teacher education partnership. We're a widening participation university. We've got 4 campuses across South Wales, and ITE is actually based in the city of Newport, which is about 20 minutes or so from the Severn Bridge. We have lots of non-standard students within our university, and as far as ITE goes, we currently have undergraduate and postgraduate primary education. So my name is Lisa Taylor, I'm Director of Education. With me this morning is...
Hi, my name's Kath Jones and I'm Head of Research Development and Pedagogic Practice in the faculty.
And I'm Sarah Kirk. I'm talking today from the perspective of a school partner, but I've actually moved into HE starting this term.
And we're delighted about that. So, okay, so we're really pleased to be sharing our ongoing research with you into the evaluation of the partnership because it's quite a new way of working for us. We've heard a lot about the accreditation process in England while we've been here, and that's been really interesting. I think I'll leave it as interesting here. But we've been through a similar process, but a very, very similar in terms of having to gain accreditation, but a very different process in terms of the requirements of the accreditation process. And one of the key things is that we have to work in joint partnership, absolute authentic partnership with our school partners. And we're both jointly accountable. The university and school partners are jointly accountable for provision and outcome. So we're really pleased to be talking about our evaluation of how that's going as we move into our 3rd year now of the partnership. So, I just mentioned briefly about ITE in Wales. It's undergone quite radical change. There's been whole-scale education reform, a new curriculum, new ITE accreditation, new professional standards. So it's been a big, big change, but actually all those things link together. So professional standards, for example, has a dimension about professional learning, as professional learning being an entitlement for all teachers. So it's been quite liberating in a way. We're still working through it, but it's been very positive. But the new way of working in terms of this authentic partnership has really sort of encouraged us all to think about these things here. Our identities, not only our identity as with Sarah as a school partner, because it's very different, you know, thinking of yourself as a school-based teacher educator rather than a mentor where the students come in for 6 weeks, then they go back to university, you know, what forms do I have to fill in, that sort of thing, job done. It's a very different sort of educative mentoring process that we're working through. So it's challenged our identities and us as teacher educators as well to not be the holders of everything and everyone comes to us and we give them the answers, but us working together in this authentic partnership. So we thought about we had to reconsider our roles, our understanding. We had to develop a conceptual framework that we all fed into and our vision for student-teacher learning that Sarah's going to talk about in a moment. Engaging with collaborative professional learning together and practitioner education. And also, it's not all rosy. There are challenges. In the beginning, it's that old brain, new brain, making that transition. And we're still in that transition. I think we always will be as we bring new partners on board. But certainly, in the very early meetings, school partners were looking to us for all the answers. And we were saying, no, you know, we're not giving answers. We need to come up with solutions together. Yes, we can give you our ideas, they can give their ideas, but we need to come up with those solutions and those sustainable solutions together. So it comes with its challenges. And, you know, I've worked in school for a long, long time. We're all very good at challenging each other and not afraid to do that. So, but that's all for the good. And then we want to talk about the impact on the partnership too. So, Sarah.
At the centre of this slide, you can see an infographic that summarises part of our vision. So it's based on the work of Shulman, and it really focuses on the students gaining pedagogical content knowledge through developing habits of hand, head, and heart. So the what, the how, and the why of teaching, so that they really develop their own sense of moral purpose, gain their own values about teaching. And the whole partnership really is structured based on research, set up the processes and practices to support the students in achieving that vision through reflection, dialogue, and the support systems that are in place. So we've got at the centre of our partnership the university, but then around that we have communities of learning, which we refer to as CALS. And the CALS are made up of a lead school, and within the lead school there's a QA lead, a school-based practitioner. So this was my role when I was in school, someone who's already practicing at the school. and they take responsibility for quality assurance of all the kind of placements and student activity within the COL. So in the COL then you have 5 other partner schools that the lead school is involved with. And it really is, we've worked really hard over the years to build it into a real community. So we meet regularly, the mentors all know one another, the senior mentors, and we've created our own community with those schools. This community of learning also has a link tutor linked to it. So they're based at the university, but then they regularly meet with us and are part of the discussions that we have. So there's always that link then with the university. And when students start on the programme, they're allocated to a COL and they stay within that COL for the duration of the programme. They move to different schools for their placements, but because we all know one another, the mentors know one another, the QA lead has really good oversight of everything, it means that student's really well supported and well known, and that everything can kind of be consistent, practices and processes are consistent. And we've also got, as Lisa said, in order to come up with those solutions, some steering groups focus on different things. So I was part of the research steering group and still am, and there's a wellbeing steering group, and they're made up of school partners, university link tutors, representatives from the local consortia, and we can meet a few times a year and discuss strategy, things that have arisen, things from feedback, evaluation, what we're going to do next, and try to really, continuously improve the partnership. And we've also got an sorry,
It's mindful of time.
an executive group made up of head teachers from these schools.
What we wanted to make sure with this ongoing conversation and collaboration is that how we frame these critical conversations. So we have plenty of opportunity to get together, to develop the partnership together. We want to be collaborative, as we say there. We want to say, actually, collaboration is a bit messy sometimes and a bit challenging and a bit difficult. So how are we going to do that? To make sure that everybody in the partnership feels valued, so they genuinely have a voice and they do enable change. We want to enable these recommendations, and we want to look at this model. As Lisa said, we're going now into the 3rd year of implementation, and we don't want to sit and say, yeah, we think some things are working quite well, but there are still some challenges, so what do we do? We also want to make sure that everybody involved has this continuous professional learning opportunity. We're all learning. Our teachers are learning, our students are learning. We're all trying to learn while we go through this, so how do we do it? So what we thought about with our evaluation is we're using 2 approaches at the moment. We're borrowing from some of the systems thinking approaches. I confess in a previous existence to being a little bit of a systems analyst. And one of the approaches I used there was soft systems to enable conversations, to not make people feel threatened about some of the difficult conversations we need to have. So we've been doing a little bit of that. As part of looking at our communities as well is, we've been looking at value creation in learning contexts and using some of those statements as markers to help us with the evaluation. So what we've been doing is getting together and talking about what does this partnership look like, putting on some workshops, being quite open, getting everybody involved, having group discussions, just saying, right, what are we looking at? What is this partnership? How is it working? Bringing in our normal evaluations from mentors, from students, and actually working as a collaborative research team. Now, Sarah was involved with a few of those days.
Yeah.
Any reflections?
I actually had the opportunity of facilitating groups, looking after the senior mentors and mentors from my call, so really interested in listening to their discussion, but also taking part then in an activity with other QA leads and having our kind of unique perspective of being within school but also university, and the insights that might bring was really interesting to share those ideas.
So this is a little bit of what we did, if you like. So we used this systems thinking approach. We used a technique called rich pictures to actually draw out what it looked like. Not just focusing on process, but where there were areas of conflict. Who saw themselves as a little bit more important? What did the partnership look like? And we put people into different groups. We put QA leads together. We put IT, we put our USW linked tutors together. We put consortia together, and we came together with these different pictures of how things looked. So there were things about process, but we were also getting a sense of what people saw were important. And some of the outcomes from this. We certainly were getting a clear idea of how people saw the partnership and looking at different groups, the people that agreed and some of the disagreements too. We also got, and I think it confirmed the complexity, the different organisations that we worked with, all the different stakeholders that were there, making sure that they had a voice. So it was confirming that complexity, which was great, but we needed to make sure we talked to these different groups. It's forced us to, in a good way, I think, redesign some of the roles and responsibilities and not just say, right, we've got mentors doing this, we have senior mentors doing that, let's do it a bit differently. We've identified areas of challenge, and I think we've certainly worked with our team to identify professional learning needs. So when we put our professional learning on for next year, for example, it's coming from what people want or feel the need to be involved with and not being enforced. So, just quickly what we've learned from this. There was a little bit of this. If anybody could see the little frog in the snow at the end, a little bit of oh my goodness moments. And it was sort of like, okay, fine, we'll tell you some of those. But a lot more of these lovely sunrise moments where we thought, yeah, we do feel that we're going in a positive direction with this. So I think Lisa will just take you through just a couple of the things that we learned.
Yeah, so we'd already heard from mentors through the evaluations, but this was really important because it surfaced some things that we hadn't come across before. But I think the most important thing that it raised was this importance of space for critical conversations to explore the theory and practice together. You can read the points up there. And this thing of being an agent of change, that I think school partners have told us that they feel well supported within the communities of learning and the communities of practice, but they feel that they actually have the power now to be an agent of change. They want to be involved. They feel motivated to be involved. There's no marginalised voices. They feel that their voices are heard because we're all working together to continuously improve the programme. And I think, as Kath said, you know, it's a cultural change which includes positive impact, but is not without those challenges. And we're not trying to create a rosy picture here. There are challenges involved, but because we've got that trust and those relationships that we've built, and we're building new relationships with partners as they come on board, we work through those challenges together. Yeah. So some areas for development. A lot of this we've mentioned already. It's a new way of working for everyone. I think one of the key differences is this educative mentoring approach rather than process-driven. Rather than coming in on a training day, what forms do I need to fill in? When do I do that? Which boxes do I tick? What evidence do we need to make sure that the students get QTS? It's much more about working with mentors to ask those questions, to frame those conversations so that we're developing student teachers who are reflective practitioners who can then become, and we're seeing it now with Year 3, become independent reflective practitioners and understand their sense of self-efficacy. And they're actually leading inset days in school, particularly around the digital pedagogies, which, you know, is one of our USPs for the provision that we have at USW.
So what we're doing now is we're going into our evaluation, I guess, in a bit more depth. And we have this model around communities of practice, communities of learning. And what we wanted to do is say, well, what sort of benchmarks, what sort of questions could we ask ourselves when we evaluate? So we've been talking about the immediate value, if you like, some of the activities that we do. We're trying to work out what the value of the partnership is. So developing this knowledge capital, again, as a collective. Trying to think about what's changing, what's different about what we're actually doing, and that's that applied value there. We have to look at performance improvements, and there's a whole different thing we can look at. You know, is it making people more confident? Are we providing, I think, more confident student teachers? Are we learning more about our own practice? And what we're also thinking as well is, okay, how is it working? So is it successful? Do we need to redefine what we do? So I guess just a couple of examples of how we are, what our current thinking is and how we've applied this model.
I think we've only got 1 minute.
We've got 1 minute. We can do this quick.
Read this quick, speed reading.
Okay, so Sarah, the immediate value?
Yeah, so in their interactions with mentors, really, and interactions with schools, you know, those little things that we can put into our meetings and professional learning days.
We're seeing lots of potential. We're helping students build their teacher identity. We feel that's quite important. Educative mentoring, knowledge capital, consistent engagement. You know, strategies for effective and sustainable collaboration so it works. Yeah. In terms of applied things, the educative mentoring is certainly being embedded. Reflective practice, the norm. we're all researchers, and I think one of the things we hope from this is we feel it's a true collaboration when we work together.
And then in terms of the realised value, you know, the sort of the KPIs that we have, the measures that we have, outputs, outcomes, income generation, and reframing it, you know, looking and reframing the partnership. We talk about building the plane in flight. I don't know if the plane will ever be built, but we're flying it. But this whole idea that the vision, whatever we do, as partners come on board, as we change and we evolve through our evaluation and reflection, the vision will always stay at the heart of the partnership.
So very quickly we're embedding it. We're running this rich picture activity now with our students next year to get them to say, well, what do you think? How does the partnership work? How do we connect between university and school? Exploring some of the things that we're doing, embedding these evaluation questions in terms of what we do, and just maintaining this collaborative evaluation.
Yeah.
So, final thoughts?
Yeah, so the messy issues that we have talked about, the model of value creation in learning to scaffold our evaluation has been really, really helpful, and we're moving on to use the CATWO analysis now as well. Responding to new perspectives as partnership grows, but the last point that I wanted to make is this new third space that we've sort of worked to operationalise, if you like. Darling Hammond talks a lot about that, and that we've managed to operationalise it by having the COL meetings, by having the steering groups where there's equal representation, and actually everybody, all stakeholders, looking at something through different lenses really provides a much richer curriculum for our student teachers, we think. And we're really looking forward to what this year brings and to continue to evaluate and hopefully add to the understanding about authentic collaboration and partnership working.
Yeah, colleagues, thank you for your time.
Diolch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone. And I suspect there's going to be many connections between the presentations. I'm Di Swift, I'm Director of Keele and North Staffordshire Teacher Education, which is a school-centred training that works in a collaborative partnership with Keele University. We describe ourselves as a third space. And this presentation is going to look very much at the detail of that knowledge capital. I'll be talking about school-based teacher educators and their agency and the time and space for these conversations and dialogues that bring together theory and practice. So our skit is a little bit different in that we were formed from a migration from Keele University to a school-led provision, so that puts us in a different space. It meant that I was able to engage with some doctoral level research to really dig deeper, a bit like the colleagues from South Wales that we've just been hearing, trying to work out what it is that we're doing, why we're doing it, and what's worth sharing. So the theoretical framework that I've used is social realism, looking at knowledge, powerful knowledge, the different forms of knowledge. And of course, the essence of social realism is about knowledge differentiation, not separation. So theory and practice, context and concept, different but not separate types of knowledge. And often they have been separated. Often it's theory, that's what's done in the unis, isn't it? Practice, that's what we do in schools. We didn't want to be a third space of separation. We wanted to be a third space of hybridity, not of conflation, not of confusion, not of practice replacing theory or theory replacing practice, but how are they recalibrated so at the same time, in the same space, you can have these different forms of knowledge interacting on each other. Just because that wasn't enough of a theoretical challenge, I brought in social realism, looking at material and apparatus and how we measure things. And the particular focus we had was on the teacher standards. The teacher standards as a materialization of professional knowledge. How do those standards affect the dialogues that we have between beginning teachers and teacher educators? So the empirical focus that I took was really drilling deep on these school-based dialogues, the dialogues that happened in school, that normally we don't witness, that normally happen behind closed doors, that normally we don't see how knowledge is structured within those conversations. And from the analysis of that, what's coming out of the thesis is this challenge that theory and practice can live in the same time, in the same space, if the differences are respected and they're brought together in a productive relationship. So the motivation for the research came from the fact that the teacher standards used for the award of QTS, the success rates at the end of initial teacher training are high 90s, 90% of our students successfully achieve QTS, but then as we're all aware, there's then this horror story lying not long behind about the number of teachers that leave in their first 4 or 5 years of teaching. So why is that? Why, if you've successfully achieved QTS and the teacher standards and you've evidenced against that material, that apparatus, why are you not thriving within the profession? And when you dig deep, the research says workload, but actually you dig underneath that workload, and it's a point that the colleagues raised earlier. It's actually about agency, and when you dig deep, it's really quite worrying that teachers as professionals don't feel they've got this professional agency. They haven't got that knowledge capital to be able to resist some of the political and ideological changes that are coming in, and they don't feel as if they're those professionals. They maybe feel more as if they're technicians. So that notion of a technician perhaps comes originally from, comes most recently from the 2010 white paper, The Importance of Teaching, which really led to the school-based zeitgeist, or increased it, and the Govian quote about teaching is a craft. And people can be a bit Marmite about that. So many teachers and ourselves talk about the craft of teaching. And what I've done in my research is get underneath that concept of craft. And craft knowledge is a variegated form of knowledge. Craft knowledge isn't just about modelling and observation. It isn't just about the practice. Craft knowledge has a theoretical aspect, a conceptual aspect that lies within it. The problem is if we just use the pedagogy of observation and modelling, we don't see the conceptual. We're not able to grab hold of it because we're not making it visible. And that leads us to the criticism. So the criticisms that the professions are, of course, about doing things, but they're about doing things in complex environments. So how do teacher educators prepare beginning teachers so that when the tips and tricks don't work, they've got something else to hang on to in those complex environments? And so again, in our research, we've used Chris Winch's work a lot, who's expanded the know-how, know-that. Again, another dualism, theory, practice, schools, HEIs, know-how, know-that. And Chris Winch has drawn on Ryle's work and others to say, no, actually, in know-how, there's lots of conceptual thinking. It's not always visible. How can we bring it visible so that we know it coexists within those hybrid spaces? So the way I researched this, the way that I looked at dialogues, with the social realism, I used Bernstein's work. And Bernstein differentiates between 2 types of dialogue. And he does use these as oppositional. A horizontal dialogue is an everyday dialogue. It's about a practical thing. It's used up in its moment. Tying your shoelaces. Once you've tied your shoelaces, job done. Next time you tie your shoelaces, you've got that knowledge. It becomes automatic. So it's a flat dialogue. It's horizontal. It's absolutely tied to the time and space of both its origination and its materialization. So Bernstein contrasts horizontal knowledge with vertical knowledge, a vertical dialogue. And a vertical dialogue is where we lift out a practical action and we relate it to an enduring concept, a big idea that lasts over time. And I'll give a few practical examples in a moment from my research. What Bernstein says is a horizontal discourse is used up in time and space in its moment. It doesn't transcend time and space. Vertical discourse does. So vertical discourse has the big concepts that wherever we are in the world, whatever moment we can draw on those, they're collective. They're part of our professional knowledge, part of that reservoir. So what I was interested in is how do we access that reservoir in a moment of practice? So Bernstein's work has been used by Carl Mayton in a concept of semantic gravity. If it's gravity heavy, it stays in its context. If it's gravity light, we're lifting out. And Mayton, as you'll see in a moment, developed a way so that we could turn the conversations into graphs. And then when I was analysing it, I was thinking, so why sometimes do we see practice as a particle, as a particular, as a moment, and why sometimes do we see practice as a theory? And that's where I've drawn on Karen Barrad's work, the feminist philosopher. And Karen Barrad's challenge is in social science, we need to bring in the idea of quantum time and space, the coexistence in the same time and the same space of both theory and practice. We need to move away from Cartesian dualisms of either theory or practice, either school or HEI. We need to bring them together, but not so it's a mush. We need to bring it together so we recognise these differences. So some of you will be more confident physicists than me. In my reference list is the Ladybird Book of Quantum Mechanics. I stopped doing physics at 14. I needed to go back to the two-slit experiment, and Karen Barrad draws very heavily on Niels Bohr's that you've got something that exists both as a particle and a wave at the same time. So in Bernstein, a particle is horizontal. It's time limited to its time and space. It's a particular moment. It's particularized. When we have a vertical discourse, we have a wave. We're connecting the particular with the concept, to and fro, back again. So just hang on to something can be both a particle and a wave. What depends is the apparatus we use to measure it. So what we've been finding is the apparatus of the teacher's standards leads us to see particles. The teacher's standards use command words, demonstrate, show, exhibit. The word pedagogy does not appear in the teacher's standards. Of course, pedagogy appears all the time within the field. So what we looked at is when we're having the dialogues, when we're having the conversation following an observation, what happens in that conversation? Is it the bottom flat line where we describe practice? Is it the top flat line where we're just saying, well, you put a theory into practice, this is the theory? Or do we wave? Is there the time and space for the agency and the waving? So with Mayton's theory, you develop a translation device which gives a numeric value to a dialogue as to how context-specific or how context-light it is. So I use that translation device, and what you've got there with the colours and the numbers is how I then coded the dialogues, so the dialogues could be represented graphically as profiles. So this is very short dialogue. It's a beginning teacher, which is the dotted line, and a teacher educator is the hard line. And again, important that I plotted them separately to show how the teacher educator and the beginning teacher's knowledge was also becoming entangled and how they were influencing each other. So in this case, it's simply the beginning teacher is describing their use of support staff in their weekly meeting, deploying support staff, direct quote from the teacher's standards, working with Jackie, very context-specific, gathering the props together for a performance. So very time and space limited. The teacher educator, in this case, didn't do anything with it, just received that dialogue. That was typical. So these are a few of the graphs from my thesis. None of them very flat, none of them right at the bottom, right on the x-axis. All of them showing some conceptual elements, but not much waving going on, lots of description going on, so some presence of concepts, but maybe tacit or implicit rather than explicit. There were one or two exceptions, and this was one of the exceptions. This was a Year 6 class in the run-up to SATs, and the teacher educator had had the beginning teacher marking books, and so in the dialogue, rather than the beginning teacher just being left with, well, you know, I've been supporting my teacher, I've been marking, which is obviously important. In the dialogue, what the teacher educator did was lift that practice of marking up to misconceptions and intervention groups. So they made clear to the beginning teacher the purpose that was within but not visible in that action of marking. You weren't just marking. You were marking because we needed to identify misconceptions, we needed intervention groups. The beginning teacher wouldn't know that unless the teacher educator used a language that accessed the concepts or the big ideas of teaching. So I then went back to the data, and these were some of the big concepts that were naturally coming out of the dialogues when I profiled them. So differentiation, curriculum, feedback, challenge, these were just a few of those big ideas. So I took the profiles and the big ideas back to the beginning teacher and teacher educators, and it was fascinating. When they saw their dialogues as profiles, as knowledge structures, this was some of their feedback. Many of the teacher educators said, well, I just thought we were having a chat, we were having a conversation. I didn't realise that I was structuring knowledge that I could be using and bringing together in a place of practice, both conceptual and contextual language. Many of the teacher educators said they now change or have changed the way that they work, and instead of it being entirely school specific, are now reaching out to some of those key and big and professional ideas, and seeing that the work they do week by week is part of being this bigger picture of the field of initial teacher education. And this is what happened subsequently. So there's 3 lines on this graph, because when I went back, I'm the tiny dotted line. I needed to make my position as researcher visible as well. But as soon as we started changing the apparatus from the teacher standards and changed the apparatus to that conceptual thinking, then we were able to engage with those waves, understanding the concepts, understanding that notion of complexity. And so I've begun to develop this idea that when we just observe a model, it's a horizontal space. When it's implicit or tacit, as we move along, there's a little wave. When we're explicit, when the teacher educator is explicitly saying, you were thinking about interventions there, then there's something for both the teacher educator and beginning teacher to butt up against, to be held accountable to relate to in the wave. And then the far one with the other horizontal line is when we just impose a theory and we make practice inert. So Bernstein says, good news, that the teacher educators can change things, that if we're more conscious of the dialogues, that those can then feed back into the way we calibrate the profession. So actually the teacher educator voice needs to make its way back through official policy documents and through other opportunities, because maybe some of the discomfort that some of us feel is because what we have in the teacher standards is where people have inserted a horizontal knowledge pretending it's vertical. They've inserted a practice pretending that actually it's a relational practice when it isn't. It's just tips and tricks. So just to leave us with a couple of final thoughts, I wonder whether policy can ever fully encapsulate the relational, and how do we work with our teacher educators so they develop a navigational gaze to see both concepts and contexts. Thank you, everyone.
And not just England, but a European partnership. So I'm here from the Irish contingent, in case you didn't recognise the accent. So we have Jan Jorgensen from University of Plymouth, Cara, also from University of Plymouth, and Jackie from University of Plymouth. And I'm Alison Egan from Marino Institute of Education in Dublin. And it took me 22 minutes on the flight yesterday to get here. Phenomenal. I'll come to Liverpool again. So this is where we are. So it's a European funded project running from 2019 to 2022, which has now been extended to 2023 due to that disease whose name we shall not mention. And it's a university and technology partnership. So as our first colleagues talked about that third space professional, this is exactly, we need to actually bring in some of that literature into our lit review for this, because it is about capturing that space between the teacher educator and education. So this technology that this project is developing is where we need to capture that third space profession, those competencies that are going on. So our partners are obviously in Dublin, and we have a technology partner in Dublin as well called H2 Learning. We have University of Minho, and they're in Braga in Portugal. We have our colleagues in Vienna, again, a teacher education college. We have the university in Santiago de Compostela, and then they have a technical partner called the Supercomputing Agency of Galicia, and they're building the infrastructure and the framework. And then University of Plymouth are obviously here in terms of their teacher education guys. And Bees Nest, again, are a Belgian partner, and again, they're technological partners. So it's that lovely mix of both. So we had our first meeting, probably a little later than scheduled, in January 2020 in Santiago de Compostela, a great kick-off meeting for a project. Everyone was very enthused, really looking forward to defining what the needs of this platform would be. And then obviously the technologists were there also to start framing what the technology might look like. And so we did a survey amongst all the partner countries. So in Ireland, we had specific needs. In Southampton, they had specific needs. Plymouth. So there's different needs. Each of us do teacher education and teacher placement in particular in slightly different ways. We have, banks of time. Maybe it's 1 day a week. Certainly in Ireland, we do a 10-week placement, which is really key because that is sort of where the teacher educator is finally embedding their knowledge in the school with their placement mentor and with the university supervisor. So we did that survey, we looked at all the requirements, and then we all know what happened in March 2020. So we needed systems quickly because placement suddenly had to go online. And what placement online meant in each country was quite different. So I know certainly in Ireland, and I have another colleague in the audience who can attest to this, from Limerick, we did no placement at all for the rest of 2020. So the teacher educators that year missed out on massive tranches of placement. And everyone was sort of in a mess, not knowing what to do. If this system had been there then, it would have been amazing because we could have put everyone onto the platform. But such is the life of technological projects. So by September 21, we'd had a good year of using other tools, but we could see what the benefits of all these other tools were. So when we came to our meeting in September 21, the piloting of the platform that I will show you shortly actually was very realistic because we knew exactly what we needed because we'd gone through everything we couldn't have for the prior year. And then obviously as part of the data collection of this, then we're using lots of instruments. So we're using a technological self-efficacy for digital competencies instrument. That's a questionnaire. We're doing semi-structured interviews with all the participants in the placement triad. We all have our own strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats reflection matrix. And obviously then we can look at the system logs, so actually use of the system and what people are drawn to on the system. So there's lots of literature. Many of you referred to it earlier. Obviously, Darling Hammond was a key driver for all our sort of research, what teaching placement was in each of our countries. We have an Irish colleague, Tony Hall, who actually created a similar system probably 10 years ago at this stage. It didn't get funding. It was only being used in one college. But a lot of the learnings for that system and what placement needed actually helped inform what some of this new system, the European-wide system, looks like. Obviously, there are informal peer sharing and learning opportunities that we're trying to capture, be that on a discussion forum or through chats on this system. And there are other competing platforms. So that came into very sharp reflection when we had to use Teams, Moodle, Zoom, WhatsApp, whatever we happened to have on our phones from March 2020 until we could start testing this new system. And as I said, Enda Donlan had other versions in Ireland. So this is what a preview of what the platform looks like. Very much this is sort of the key user interface. So what does the student need? Typically they need a calendar. They need to know when their placement is on. Any documents they need to share with their placement supervisor, with their university mentors, it's all there on the platform as well. And then the little communication tool on the right, which is quite nice. But the platform also comes with some an online training course for those using the platform because we can't expect people to suddenly intuitively know how it works. So they call that a SPOC, Small Professional Online Course, and you'll see that on the platform as well. So this is an example of the SPOC, and it's all basically self-paced, just-in-time learning. So as you have a question about the platform, you can go into the relevant section on the SPOC to help you find out more about that section you need to use on the platform. The document sharing, and I suppose Jan will talk about some of the data, is where the real potential is. So it's sharing that feedback form from the lesson, it's sharing the university requirements, and it's putting them mediated through this technological space to actually capture what's going on in that school placement classroom. And communication. So we had a trial in Ireland, it was in March just this year, and there was lots of chat between mentors and tutees and university lecturers going on in this space, which is great because it means they were actually interacting with the platform. But an added value was the internationalization of it, so they could talk to colleagues in Portugal, they could talk to colleagues in Vienna, those who have access to the space at the moment. Great, thanks Jan.
Thanks, Alison. So just a quick whiz through some of the early findings. And for all sorts of reasons, the sample size varied between the 5 countries. And this was partly through the disruption to places because of the disease we will not mention, but also it's because of variations between the institutions in the flexibility with which they could try out a new platform rather than sticking with the instruments that they'd already got. We've had some feedback already, and it's overall positive. They think the platform's attractive, it's logical. There are various affordances that are really helping the students. So being able to use communication and reflection tools has gone down well. Having the different roles that you can use the platform as a tutor or a mentor or a student, and also having the introduction course that orients students towards a reflective approach to their placements. We picked up some of the technical glitches and the ways in which we could refine it. Having a single sign-on and access from different platforms would be just wonderful. And with e-portfolios, being able to tag or index the things that you've uploaded so that they become searchable would also help a lot. We tried to set up this international forum where students from different countries could talk to each other, but that would be helpful if we had alerts when there are new messages on the system. Otherwise, it's quite hard to keep the conversation going. We feel that the international aspect of the project is something that's where the potential is yet to be developed, and perhaps, though, we have to remember that over the last couple of years, there's been quite a lot going on, and perhaps not everyone's had the space to take on this extra idea. We're hopeful that in the next few months, we might get more international conversations going. So, just to give you some background to what it's been like doing EKT in the English context, we started working at our university with first-year primary student teachers who are mainly school leavers. They're on a 3-year BEd course leading to qualified teacher status, and their program includes, across the course, 24 weeks of placement. These placements will range from small village schools to large 3-form entry urban primary schools in the southwest, and the student teachers, therefore, will be working with children from a range of socio-economic, ethnic, cultural backgrounds, though perhaps not as wide as a variety as they might have in other parts of England. When they're on placement, the students are supported by university-based mentors and by school mentors. And then back in the university tutors set up the placement experience and then come and do the debriefing afterwards. And this is how we formulated that triadic relationship between school, university, and students. But a bit of a reality check as to what it's actually been like trying to implement a project like this at a time when there's been such disruption. And really, what's happened for us is the project has probably prompted us to look with different eyes, from a different perspective, about the reality of our provision. So we found actually that students were pretty reluctant to join the project. There are all sorts of reasons for this. I think if you think about the first years last year, experiencing university after a very disruptive time of learning, and then coming into the huge uncertainty of going out on placement. I can remember how I felt when I first went out on my first placement. They'd got an awful lot going on. Perhaps this was just another thing that they couldn't manage. But also, I think we have to remember that the students brought with them existing digital capital from their experiences of online learning in school, and also from their experiences of using social media to keep in contact with each other. And so they were already building up their digital capital in OneDrive for documents and portfolios, in Moodle for course requirements and submitting assignments, and email to talk to their tutors. So they already had virtual communication pretty much sorted. Our school-based mentors and our associate lecture mentors, however, they often, though not always, lacked digital capital and were reluctant to spend time that would not always be paid to invest in yet another platform, and they would, having the opportunity to build more digital skills wasn't really top of their list of needs. But we have found that there are other needs, and from interviewing students and through insider knowledge from the mentors, that all groups have various needs for connection within their groups, not so much perhaps between them. They need connection to reduce their sense of isolation, to keep up to date, to keep in the loop, and to start sharing things, actual things that they found useful, that they'd like other people to look at, but also find spaces for actual face-to-face contact, to talk about the successes, but also talk about some of the challenges and the horrible days, and to talk between each other rather than sharing this across the whole of the triad. So Cara and Jackie are going to share with you some of the perspectives from within the student groups and within the mentor groups.
Thanks, Jan. I was fortunate enough to do these interviews and discuss with the students what it was that they were experiencing on placement. And what was really coming to the forefront was actually these notions of peer support. So it wasn't so apparent that they really needed this extra reflective platform, but really it was these interactions they were having, both formally and informally, with their colleagues that they were finding really valuable. And just a slightly different twist on this third space we've been discussing this morning is a different theorization of it through this peer learning idea. And I'm considering it here and positioning as this hybrid space between independent learning experiences and formal teaching. And it's great to see how many different interpretations of this space that we have. So just a quick few examples of these formal and informal spaces. So as academics, as lecturers, we might implement some of these in our teaching, in our assignments, looking at group presentations, peer assessments, and in-class discussions. But what's really interesting and perhaps more difficult to capture, but really valuable, is these coffee catch-ups, social media chats, and even the travel to and from placement. So thinking about this, from what we were discussing and what we were finding out from the students, is that these opportunities for peer-to-peer learning can be formally built within systems, such as lesson study, and I imagine many colleagues in the room have ways in which they try and get their students to engage with each other. And the EKT platform has the capacity to foster this and inclusion in these peer communities that we have implemented and created space for. But richly and surprisingly as well was actually finding shared from the pilot stage of the project, with our reference up there, is participants were reflecting on car journeys and WhatsApp groups being helpful space for reflection rather than this additional platform. And they discussed these handwritten notes that Jan mentioned about indexing and maybe putting up somewhere, commenting how a space to store these would be helpful. But students didn't necessarily want another digital platform because we can't capture or force these informal spaces that are actually proving to be really valuable. And they've found ways to find their own spaces through these. So what intended to be an interview about student reflection became apparent that it did not always align with our expectations, but there's this richness in these spaces that we can develop. So thinking about this just for one last time, this peer support is not as well documented as many of you might have known, and informal peer support even less so because it's hard to conceptualize. But the value of it comes from this less or non-hierarchical idea of engaging with peers that's maybe more comfortable and promoting more mutuality with each other. student-to-student discussions can feel more comfortable than perhaps student to mentor, student to university tutor. And maybe their real feelings and their triumphs and their challenges are coming through, so feeling safe from these academic expectations. And we all know how stressful some of these times can be for our students, and they're finding the means which work for them without adding extra paperwork or extra requirements.
Well, we're pretty much out of time. So what I'm going to say is, while the students might not need those spaces, that type of platform, what we have found is that, yeah, please, thank you, is building on what our Wales cohort was saying earlier, this could really serve our mentors, our school-based mentors who might be spread geographically, who might not be able to come in person, like we saw some of those lovely examples earlier. We're looking for that space for them to be able to collaborate in that way. So we're going to explore that further and how that platform might benefit them to collaborate, and I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
We have some time left for questions. I'm not sure if there's a mic available for people to answer with, or do you want me to pass this? Thank you, that's really helpful. Any questions? Yes.
Thanks very much. I do find it fascinating hearing these sort of transnational accounts of how universities and schools work together, with technologies or without technologies, to try to establish that common purpose or common vision around their teacher learning. And I think my question is probably more for the first group of presenters, and possibly Melanie at the end, about what kinds of effects there were, what were the ripple effects of working in these ways with schools through these communities, whatever they're called. But to what extent is there a kind of deliberate disruption sometimes of the ways things are done in schools, or is it just harnessing the best of schools? What happens when a new school partner comes along? Do you have to start again from the beginning? It's that kind of elusive thing that we all want, to get that common vision. And it's really interesting accounts of how that's happening. But what happens beyond the immediate, that close work with people who are doing the ITE? What about the rest of the school? What goes on there? Do you need a microphone, or can we just be...
If you could grab a wireless mic, that'd be great.
Okay, thanks. Just from it can be a challenge, I think, when a new partner joins, particularly if they were involved in our old programme, and what I was talking about, that very operational, expecting to be told when to fill that form in, when to do this. The students are in for 6 weeks, then they go back to university, because we've now got this layered placement approach where they're with us for a couple of weeks in school, for 2 weeks back, and so on. They do a block in year 3. So I think it is a challenge, but I think it's all about culture and relationships. When they join the community of learning meetings, they see the culture that's already there in terms of very open, very honest dialogue, that genuine third space. And it takes time, and it takes scaffolding, it takes support to change that mindset. But I think that's what overcomes it. Sarah, I don't know if you want to say anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in my role that I had as a QA lead, with the other QA leads, we've worked really hard to form a team as well, and to be supportive to one another, formally and informally. We have our formal meetings, but those informal conversations, like you were talking about, for us as practitioners are equally important. We're there for one another, to make sure that anyone coming in is on board with the vision, but also that we understand them and their needs, and that we can support them. We've talked about that, haven't we? About how, as we grow, even though we're going to keep the vision, we might need to adapt our practices to be inclusive of, how we're evolving.
I think we've changed our approach to professional learning as well, in terms of being, particularly regard to mentors, being much more collaboratively working with our partners, not making assumptions, but actually genuinely co-designing the programme. And there was a point made, I think, in a number of the sessions about the importance of trust. I think that helps, because when we have those ripples, and those disruptive ripples, I think, are really necessary. They're so important to make you rethink about, well, okay, so why are we doing it this way, or do we need to change? So I think that having that development, that opportunity to co-design, to co-create, to genuinely do it, I think has been very important. There was an interesting parallel, I think, between us and the last session, in terms of when you were talking about the coach, and we were saying, gosh, that's like our QA leads. Having that important person there was just, you know, it's just fabulous to hear the different practice going on in different parts there. I hope that's adequate to start.
Thank you.
I think one of the ways that we get schools involved and keen to be part of the TAP is because we go out and we speak to principals and we explain to them exactly the support that we will give and how the whole thing is structured, and they really appreciate that role of the school-based coach and having a connection directly to the university. So you're not ringing up, you're not getting this sort of gatekeeper on the phone saying, I'll pass this message on. There's an immediacy to any sort of action that's needed. And I think that school-based coach is the real crucial role for us.
Would any other presenters like to answer? No. Okay, next question, please. Yes.
I'd like to ask Diane, if I can, I found your presentation really interesting. There's always a danger in pushing a metaphor too far, but just sticking with quantum mechanics, one of the principles of quantum mechanics is that the observer, you can't observe without affecting the experiment. So the observer affects the outcome, and I think we saw that in your graphs, in that after you reflected back some of your earlier graphs, you saw the more intertwining of theory and practice later on. So that's great for those conversations in which you're involved. So my question is about what can you do to try and raise the level of conversation in the future when you're not observing, when you're not able to intervene or interfere, as they might say it, to try and raise the level of conversation and make sure that intertwining is always happening in the conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, and it was so I think there's two responses I'd want to make. In my pilot study, it ended after I'd graphed, and then it was one of those momentary conversations where the beginning teacher and teacher educator who had been involved in the pilot, who said, since seeing that graph, we've changed the way we work. So one of the things that we're looking at is, do we actually build into our teacher educator support, share the methodology with them so that they can then graph their own dialogues and develop that agency. I think the other is us changing. So one of the things it enabled us to reflect on is we modestly call ourselves a scholarly skit. And actually what we realised was our own paperwork, our own apparatus, our own way of being was actually limiting the conversations. We were too beholden to the teacher standards and some of the other official documentation. So we've changed the way that we work to make the concepts visible. So now when there is a dialogue, beginning teachers and teacher educators need to identify the key concept or the big idea that they are being accountable and responsible to in relation to the profession. So we're trying two approaches there. But thank you for your question.
Any other questions? Okay. Just giving a little bit more time if you're thinking about it. Well, I don't come from Wales, England, Australia, or whatever, so it was all very new to me in a way, except in Scotland, of course, we're looking at partnership as well, especially since the pandemic, when relationships that might already have been fractured between universities and schools we're under the spotlight in terms of what are we doing, how are we going to deal with this, and what's our way forward. So it's been really fascinating listening to such rich papers, engaging with these fundamental ideas, which are so important. And I really enjoyed that idea of changing the positionality of the key individuals in the school so that they become collaborative rather than people who are maybe passive recipients of the pre-service teacher experience and the university assessment approach. So I'm really grateful to all of you for your presentations. Thank you very much.